Hi, everyone. Welcome to this introductory session on ARC funding opportunities. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we are all meeting and pay our respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I would also like to acknowledge and pay my respects to all First Nations peoples in the room with us today. This session is the first in a series of 3 that the Faculty Research Office is organizing. And this series is really a response to the feedback that we received via a survey that we put out to all our academics at the end of last year. This first session is really just an introduction to all the ARC schemes that we tend to engage with as a faculty. The second session is going to be a deep dive into 2 previously successful ARC applications, and that one will take you through the entire process. So from going from research idea to developing the proposal itself, you'll get a view of assessors' comments and even the rejoinder that went back in. And then the third session of this series will actually focus on the actual delivery and management of an ARC project. So this week, next week, the week after, that's when it's all happening. We're super grateful to be able to tap into the expertise and the experience of 3 colleagues today. Joining us, we've got Peter Sullivan. Peter, if you could, Sarah Hopkins. And we've got Sharon Morley. There we go, yeah. What I might do is I will hand the mic over to each of them to give you a brief 2-minute introduction around, their experience with the ARC and different ARC schemes. Peter, can I hand over to you?
Thanks, Colleen. So I'm retired from Monash, but I'm always happy to comment on project drafts or whatever. So I've had both successful discovery grants and also successful linkage grants. I don't think we have in the Faculty of Education, I don't think we pursue linkage grants as much as we could. But of course, linkage grants are actually more difficult to manage. And so there's some advantage in getting the discovery grants. I was also a member of the Social, Behavioural and Economics research panel of the ARC for 4 years, and also a member of the panel on various smaller grant projects or grant schemes. So I've had experience of each of the stages in the process, and I'll be happy to answer questions, and I've got some thoughts that I'm happy to share if there's an opportunity.
Thanks, Peter. Sarah, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Colleen. So I was successful last year with a discovery project, and I just had a quick look at the dates, and my first expression of interest was in 2019, and I don't know what happened in 2020. Nothing, obviously. And then in 2021, I got the proposal in, the application, and it wasn't successful. And then I changed a few things and put it in for 2022, and it was successful, which is wonderful. And there were some luck factors in there that I'm happy to share, as well as some feedback factors that I took on board. And many years when I first got my PhD, which was actually 20 years ago, which is a long time. But I was on a group then, and we were at a different university, and we got an ARC discovery, and I learned a lot from that, and I think that went pretty pear-shaped, and I was pretty determined not to make the same mistakes, but it was obviously many years later. So I'm happy to share any of that and answer anyone's questions.
Thanks for that, Sarah. Sharon, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks very much for having me here. I'm from the research development team in the Monash Research Office. I've been kicking around Monash University for about 10 years now in research development and business development roles at school level, faculty level and central level, and have worked with academic teams to develop quite a number of ARC grants over that time. And my job now is in reviewing grants with Luke's team. We don't tend to work on DECRAs and linkages as much as I'd like, but we're certainly reviewing future fellowships at the moment. So yeah, I'm just here to provide any information and answer questions if I can.
Thanks, Sharon. Okay, so with that covered, let's jump into the meat and potatoes of this thing. So Sharon's going to take us through a presentation that she's prepared for us, and she'll go through the different schemes that the faculty tends to engage with. What we hope to have is about 15 minutes on the very end of this session for you to ask all your questions. If you've got any questions along the way, feel free to pop it into the chat, and be sure to also let us know who you'd like to actually answer the question. And that's it. Sharon, over to you.
Great, thank you. I'll just share these slides. That's come through okay, I hope.
Yep, perfect.
Great. Okay, so as Colleen said, I'll just talk to you about the ARC's, yeah, this is working. Some of the key schemes that the Faculty of Education engage with, those being the DECRA scheme, the Discovery Early Career Researcher Award, and the Future Fellowships. So 2 of our fellowships schemes and 2 project funding schemes, the Discovery Projects and Linkage Projects. The ARC works through the National Competitive Grants Program, supporting excellent research and research training that is for the benefit of Australia and Australians. And that's one of the key points that we come back to a lot. They have a competitive peer review process, and their 2 main programs are the Discovery Program and the Linkage Program. They fund quite a lot of different kinds of projects under each of those broad overarching ones. The focus of the Discovery Program is around pure basic research, moving into the practical application of that research, whereas the focus of the Linkage Program tends to commence at that practical application and move it forward through translation. There's a lot of squishy areas around that though, in what they'll accept. So looking at this diagram, this is the funding that's been dispersed by the ARC over the last 3 years. And the boxes are proportional to the amount of funding that they've dished out. So you can see really clearly that the Discovery Program is their largest program in terms of the value of those grants, at around $740,000 in the last 3 years. And sort of by comparison, the DECRA scheme is around $252,000 handed out in the last 3 years. If you're looking at the Linkage Program, it's the Centre of Excellence scheme that is their largest. But interestingly, that one really only disperses funding once every 3 years. So the value of those grants really is very high. But we'll really be only concentrating on those 4 starred ones there today. So the award rates across all disciplines is pretty tight. They are very highly competitive grants. So your applications really have to be quite stellar and really hit the selection criteria with a resounding blow. Which is where the review and the MRO can come into play and help with that. If we look at the return rate for grants that are awarded, this is how much the ARC cuts your budget. It's generally really good for fellowships, around 92%. But for Discovery, the return rate can be as low as 70%, depending on the year. This is mainly because fellowships have a set rate for salary and a set rate for project funding. And so there's not a lot of wriggle room for the panel members to decide to cut budgets However, with the discovery projects, it could be a little bit subjective whether a project needs a particular item in the budget. So that's why we tend to see cuts occurring in that scheme. If we look at the success rates for HASS disciplines, they're actually pretty much comparable to all disciplines. So this helps me to believe that the assessment process is reasonably fair in this regard. So if we look at individual schemes now, for the DECRA scheme, the salary funding that you can be awarded here is around 112,000 per year, and that is a contribution to your salary. It's not intended to cover the entire salary, and certainly 30% on costs is less than what Monash actually pays for on costs, so there is a need for Monash to cover the shortfall there as well. So fellowships across the board are something that you need to discuss with your research office and with your school officials, because there will be some cost to be borne by the school or faculty. Duration of DECRAs are around 3 years, and you get $50,000 a year to carry out your project, and the ARC award 200 of these each year. You can only ever receive one DECRA award in your career, and you can actually only apply twice for a DECRA during your career. But given they're up to 5 years post PhD, the timing for that makes quite a bit of sense. For the selection criteria, the DECRA scheme are looking for high quality research project and the emerging capability of the fellow for leadership and supervision. So it's not expected that you have this as an early career fellow, but it certainly should be something that you write into your proposal and show that you're developing. There'll be collaboration in there as well, and they'll be looking for excellent and innovative research, creating new knowledge, significant problem or gap, representing value for money. These are themes that carry across through all of the ARC's programs. Outcomes should be of benefit to Australia across a number of areas, and you need to create a picture of a diverse career pathway through that through the proposal. For the future fellowships, there are 3 salary levels in future fellowships. Those programs go for 4 years, and you get $60,000 a year to undertake the project, and the ARC will award around 100 of those each year. Again, you can only receive 1 future fellowship during your career, and that's not 1 at each salary funding level, that's 1 overall. What we usually find is as people perhaps submit and then are not successful the following year, they may have to go for the next level up, and then they may go for the next level up, and that's fine, but you can only apply 3 times across all of the levels as well. So most future fellows are between 5 to 10 years post PhD. In terms of selection criteria, for the future fellowships, they're looking for demonstrated capacity for high quality research and leadership. So you need to have a few runs on the board to be truly competitive for the future fellowship scheme. They're looking for national and international research collaboration. So there's an expectation that you're going out global at this point in your career. Same as for DECRA, excellent basic research, solve a gap in knowledge, value for money, these sorts of things, outcomes that are of a benefit to Australia. And interestingly, enhancing the scale and focus of research in Australian government priority areas. Now, ARC used to run quite strictly to government priorities, and they had them defined. They're all a little bit foggy at the moment with the change of government, but if there are priority documents that you're aware of in your field of research, do make sure that you mention those in your proposal. Probably one of the most controversial parts of this scheme is where the selection criteria says that you need to be recruited and retained by universities in continuing academic positions. For this, the ARC is following an Australian government mandate that requests that they support research capacity and keep academics in our universities here in Australia doing research for Australia. However, the ARC does not and cannot decide this for universities. The universities decide this. Certainly when we look into the award data around this little clause in the selection criteria, we note that the data doesn't really match that. We've got plenty of successful applications where the proposal has not confirmed that this is going to be the case, and the reverse is true too. So the key point I wanted to bring up here was certainly don't worry too much if you're not 100% sure you can guarantee this. Go ahead and apply anyway, because the ARC can't make these decisions for the universities. Moving on to project funding under the Discovery project. Discoveries are up to 5 years in length, and they can be awarded between $30,000 and $500,000 per year. And the ARC awards 200 in every round. Project funding under Discovery can be undertaken as an individual researcher or as a team effort. An individual can hold 2 Discovery projects as a CI, or they can hold a fellowship and a Discovery project. I just wanted to point this one thing out about the eligible expenditure that you can use Discovery project money for. Might be of relevance to this group. So unless meeting the definition of research, the Discovery money can't be used to support the production of teaching materials. So I'm just mentioning this because this is the Faculty of Education. I'm sure you develop teaching materials. They need to be aligned with a research component or a research aspect. So just be careful of that and how you word that. Certainly there's plenty of people around who can help you define that properly for this so that you don't run afoul of this point. Objectives is national and international research collaboration, enhancing the scale and focus of research in priority areas for the government, and just expanding that knowledge base and capacity in Australia for the benefit of Australia. There's a fair theme around benefits for Australia that come across here. So be aware of that when you're wanting to do research with international partners. Linkage program. Linkage projects are one of my favourite. Unfortunately, I don't get to work on them as much as I'd like to. They're 2 to 5 years in duration, and you can be awarded $50,000 to $300,000 per year. You can actually hold 4 projects under the linkage program as a CI or a director. Linkage projects have to include at least one partner organisation, and that partner needs to commit cash and in-kind to the project. One partner or all partners need to contribute enough cash and in-kind that it matches the ARC request. And that cash must be about 25% of the ask. And we will come back and have a closer look at this as well. Partner organisations can be Australian or international, but they can't be in a controlled entity of a university. And you can't use any of the money for salaries for named CIs or PIs on that grant. The objectives of the scheme is to fund internationally competitive projects, and probably the key is to establish and strengthen research alliances that are between industries, stakeholders and universities. So the real core aim of the linkage program is to make these kinds of relationships between researchers and stakeholders stronger. And same again, benefits for Australia, new knowledge as normal. So just going back to that cash matching, so no matter how you build it, the cash and in-kind can't be less than what you want the ARC to give you for your project. So minimum of 25% cash is a requirement. So you do need to have partners that are willing to put up cash in order to get one of these through. We usually find 30% cash is a bit more competitive. The aim being that you need to really show that your partner is invested in the outcomes of your project for linkage. If all of your partner organisations are on the exempt partners list, that minimum cash contribution is not a requirement. So this includes public records offices, herbaria, charities, museums, and other types of collecting organisations, not-for-profit organisations, small business and startups. So there's quite good opportunity there to work with those kinds of organisations and not have to find that kind of cash level. On the whole, the linkage program is quite a lucrative one as well. If we just go sideways now and have a look at the assessment process across all the schemes, the scores that are attributed, the levels of scores for each of the main selection criteria varies a bit depending on the scope and purpose of the scheme in question. So you'll see there that for future fellowships, they really want to fund excellent researchers at mid-career level. So 50% of the score is based entirely on the investigator and their capability. This is less so for DECRA, but you do need to have a really good quality project that shows that you're going to develop that DECRA into future leader, future fellowship. Discovery projects similarly need to be a high quality, innovative project. And interestingly, in the linkage scheme, 30% of your score is based around the strength of your research alliance. So it's quite clear from the weighting of the scores that they are related to the overall purpose of those schemes. Now, your very own research office have done an enormous amount of work pulling all this data from Scopus and Google Scholar as well, I think, and have provided some benchmark information on the kinds of people who get awarded these schemes. So, I mean, I'm intending to let the attendees have a look at this a bit closer in their own time, but a key point is to note the wide range of metrics that can be seen across awardees for those various schemes. I think the take home from this is you can't really expect that if you have really awesome metrics that will just ride you through to success. There will be more to it than just metrics. They are one part of the story only in demonstrating your success and the fundability of your project as well. But it's also useful to note that if your metrics tend to be a bit below average for the scheme, you may like to consider whether this is actually the best year to go for that, given the limits to how many times you can apply. You may be better off concentrating on publishing or developing other indicators of leadership so that you're ready for ARC funding in subsequent years. This is something that you could probably discuss with your research office or even the MRO if you like, just to get a feel for where you might sit. The assessment process is fairly detailed. The main thing I wanted to point out from this slide, though, is that there are general assessors and there are detailed assessors. It's the detailed assessors that that will provide the information or the feedback that you will write a rejoinder on. So that's an opportunity to dispute the opinion of the detailed assessors and point out aspects of your proposal that might have been misunderstood. So then the general assessors will look at detailed assessor comments, scores, and the rejoinder response, and discuss the proposals entering scores into RMS. RMS will provide a ranked list, and then they'll decide from that ranked list who is actually going to get funding. So probably the key take home here, which I'm going to go into now, is that the detailed assessors only provide one part of the whole scoring. Your general assessors may not actually be in your field of research. They may be slightly left field of that. In addition, the general assessors could be reviewing up to 30 applications. So if we're going to look at some top tips for writing an ARC grant, do keep this in mind. Those poor guys are really tired. They've read a lot of grants. So we suggest really strongly to write clearly and simply. Leave white space on the page. It helps the eye to feel more relaxed about what you're reading. Provide a really clear diagram that captures your proposal and its inputs and its outputs and where it fits in the scheme of things. Write specifically to address the selection criteria. We even suggest use selection criteria as subheadings, just to make it brutally clear that you have answered each of the selection criteria and where the assessors can find the answer to that. Get plenty of reviews on your grant. It might seem obvious, but poor grammar and bad spelling do make an impact for assessors who are reading multiple grants. And to the best of your ability, either avoid jargon entirely or make sure it's quite clearly defined. You might even like to pub test your proposal and make sure that the layperson can really understand what you're getting at and why it's important and what benefit it's going to have for Australia. These are really, really key points to consider. So it's not just the scheme objectives, but it's also what's been funded before. Some of the really useful documents will be the grant guidelines and the instructions to applicants. All those sorts of documents can be downloaded from Grant Connect. If you have partners, please get them to look at the draft agreements prior to submission. This will help enormously at the post-award stage. Monash also provides ARC costing models, which you really need to use in order to make sure that your salaries for RAs and are costed correctly because of that difference in on costs. My greatest advice is review and revise and review again and revise again. So do start early. I've provided some links to some key ARC resources. The ARC selection outcome reports and grant search is a really great way of finding out who's been funded in what topics before. The national interest test is also great. So if you've got a particular project in mind, it's really useful to figure out whether that's been funded prior and yeah, how it's been pitched. That's about it from me. Do contact us if you have any questions or want to discuss something. We can certainly organise meetings with researchers if need be. So yeah, thanks very much, and I'm happy to take questions when we're ready.
Thanks, Sharon. Any questions from the room? Let me just check what's in the chat. I've got a question from Stacey, and I think this relates to linkage projects and exempt partner orgs. Stacey's nodding. Stacey's question is, what about health services and hospitals? Do they fall in the exempt partner org category?
No, they would be ultimately for profit organizations.
So they'll be expected to
Yeah.
offer the
Put
cash
some
in.
cash in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some
Any
of
other questions? Oh, sorry, go on,
the-
Sharon.
Yeah, some of the smaller, like say the little mental health groups and smaller not-for-profit help organizations are fine, but the hospitals and stuff, yeah, they definitely would be for profit.
Sally, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick question on the size of the organisation, like a small not-for-profit community organisations seen any differently to, you know, larger, more substantial sort of, or long, how long they've been set up, that sort of.
If they're registered as not-for-profit organization, they're an exempt organization. So
And in terms of the sort of likelihood or how they are viewed by the committee and the panels, does a smaller localized organisation count any more highly, do you think, or less? Sorry, less, I guess.
you need to consider the benefit to Australia aspect of the funding, the selection criteria. So if your results are really localized, you need to have, say, plans in place for upscaling.
Yeah.
Even if they're outside of the scope of the proposal, having the plans for upscaling and showing that national benefit is going to be really important.
Yeah, thank you.
Peter, have you got any insights on that in terms of linkages and the site partner orgs?
Well, I think that again, it's the quality of the project, but and the match of the partner with the project. Now, if it's like better funded and more larger organisations around that are doing the same thing as the not-for-profit organisation, then you better to go for the larger organisation. Although I noticed that Gary had put a comment in to ask about education departments. Now, they'd be the ideal partner to get, but they're actually also very difficult, or at least in the Victorian case, they're very difficult to engage. And so other systems or even individual schools, you know, if they were contributing, I don't know, 10,000 or something, it would actually give you a lot of flexibility and still gets a partner and still gets research that's valuable for the school. So it's a matter of trying to find out a partner who's willing to work with you to do that. Now, but again, it's again the quality of the project. It may be that something that's particularly relevant for a department, an education department, they'll jump at it, but it couldn't be probably something that the department do as a mainstream thing like literacy or numeracy or science or something that they wouldn't see that as being of particularly relevance for them.
Thanks, Peter. Any other questions? While we're waiting for the next question, I actually collected a few questions from the Faculty Research Office team, and here's one of them. Do the assessors in the ARC want to see a professor named on the team? And if you don't have a professor on the team, what are the chances of success? Any insights from anyone on the panel?
Now, again, my thinking would be that one of the things you need to be able to do is establish that your team can do the project. Yeah, the project is important in the first case, but then the team is actually the right group of people to do it. They're more than any other group of people. This is the group of people to do this important project. And so having someone that's experienced, I noticed that for the discovery and linkage, the average number of years post PhD in Sharon's data was 18 years or something like that. So I think that what it means is that the ARC value experience.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Peter. They want to know that their investment in that team is going to be well placed and well used, and lead to benefits for Australia. So, you know, putting that trust in somebody that has a few runs on the board will be really important to them.
Thank you.
But I don't think it has to be a professor as such. Just the years of experience to support what you want to do.
Thank you.
Suppose I'd
Trudy?
be interested to hear from Peter or Sarah if there are any other sort of big tips that they might have, or lessons they've learned that they think would be important to share with everyone who's here.
Just pausing in case Sarah wants to talk.
I don't mind, Peter. I've got something to say, but happy to go after you.
Oh well, I think that it's actually quite true that you get people reading your applications that don't know your field. But even within the field of education, a lot of research projects are quite specific, and even the so-called specialist assessors might not understand the nuances of your theoretical framework or whatever. And so you have to explain it to more or less a lay audience all the time. One of the most successful projects, well, researchers when I was there, is the sort of person that when he was talking in a lecture, you could barely understand him. But when he wrote his research applications, it was so clear. It was crystal clear, the writing and the clarity and the definitions. And so writing it clearly is such an important idea. They say that the goal is not to convince yourself or convince a friend, but to convince an enemy that your project's important, that you're the right person, that the project can be done, that the funding is appropriate, that you understand the field, you understand what's going on, you're situated in the literature. And so trying to find ways to do that and getting feedback. I think what Sharon said about getting feedback and revising and then getting more feedback and revising is so important. Sarah, you have a go.
Thanks, Peter. So it's kind of easier to respond to questions because there's so many different kind of lenses, but I'll just give some tips that are on my mind. So for me, the ARC that went wrong is that, I was asked to join a team as a young researcher, and we did get the ARC. My heart was not in it. That was not my passion, although I found it very interesting. And the way, and perhaps they were the leaders of the ARC were just kind of starting as well. But when we got the money, we just didn't know what to do. We hadn't planned it, that we were absolutely ready to go. And so sometimes you feel like, oh my goodness, now we've got to do this. Whereas I've had this ARC, as soon as we heard we got it, we knew exactly what we were going to do. We knew who our project manager was. We had some idea of the RAs, and I don't have to think about how many students, where am I going to get them from, what are we doing? It's all there. So you put so much work into it. And then once you get it, you just want to be able to do it. You don't have to want to rethink it all. So if anybody's thinking of a discovery now, and you want to know where to start, I'd really start by, and everybody's different. So that's the whole, everybody gets there a different way. But I'd start by actually saying, if I had this money, what studies would I want to see done? And how do I want to see them done? And I think you get distracted if you think, how am I going to win the money? Because you just get distracted. You start asking professors or teams or whatever, and you haven't developed your ideas yet, and you just get sidetracked. And really, if you're going, for me, for a DP, you've got to, you be convinced that this is really going to change and benefit Australia, and really write what you want to see done and what you want to have collected, and the rest will follow, the benefits and all that kind of thing as well. So I'd start by writing your studies and your methodology. And I thought that, Sharon, it's very straightforward, but what you shared about pure research, strategic research and applied research, it's really good to have a clear understanding about the different schemes. And so when I put in my first ARC, and it got knocked back, I was much more focused on strategic and what I thought was how I was going to target practice and what difference that would make. It wasn't translational, it wasn't applied. But then, and there was theoretical innovation there, but in my second go, I really brought that to the top. And then I had the practical innovation in there as well. And so I think that made a bit of a difference. So it's really, you know, what knowledge is needed. And in education, sometimes it's not knowledge that we need changes in practice. And so that's your linkage. If there's something you don't understand or something that needs to be extended, then that's the discovery. And so that, I think that made a difference for me. And also the luck that was involved was, when I first put it in, I got 4 reviewers. 4 reviewers are hard to please. And then in the second shot, I only had 2 reviewers. And so, you know, that was kind of easy to please. And I changed my FOR codes as well. So going from education focus to learning sciences was a big plus for me. And so it was seen very novel that we actually had access to schools, you know, from the learning science people, where it's a given if you're from an educational perspective that you would be working with students in schools. So there's a lot of strategy and a bit of luck, and then, you know, a lot of work as well. And so if you do decide to take on an ARC, then it is understanding the time frame and then prioritizing, and you have to say no to other things. So if you're saying there's so much that comes up and so much that's interesting, and an ARC is a paper or probably 2 papers in a good journal, you have to give that time up. It's just not going to happen without that time. So you've got to be really sure that this is what you want, and then you've got to make sure that you say no to other things. As good as they look, you just won't have the time that's needed to put into it.
Sarah, on the FOR codes, or Sharon or Peter, we get asked that a lot because we see the results and there's not a lot funded in education, hasn't been for many years. What are your thoughts on how people should be coding their work? I mean, I know we've always said code where the panel will best understand what you're doing, but should people be thinking about that a bit differently than we have done in the past, do you think?
Yeah, I don't think, Trudy, you can actually change it. It's where it best fits, because in my field, I'm right at the intersection of cognitive science and maths education, and they don't really gel together. And so I got some really funny comments that just sent the alarm bells that probably the education focus, it's who you're referencing as well. So yeah, but I don't think you can manipulate things too much in the end. But if you do fall between the cracks somewhere, then have a real think about which way to go for. And it was just that I was having coffee with Selwyn in the kitchen, and you know, he suggested it, and it all went from there. So
I've had a couple of things to add to that, Sarah. One of the things you can do is go into the database of funded projects and check out what types of projects have been funded under different FOR codes, which is a good way to get a feel for whether your proposal is going to fit into that FOR code as well. And also, we sometimes find when you're trying to get a fellowship, you're really presenting your entire track history. And so sometimes you'll need an assessor that understands your track record rather than the project that you're putting forward at that time. So it's just another thing to think of. If the majority of your track has been in a slightly different field, but you're now moving into a different field, it might be better to get assessors that will understand your track than your project for fellowships.
Can I add one thing to what Sarah said? That was a really important comment about planning your project properly, you know, including the budget and the you know, what you're going to do. But just to reassure people that whatever research you're going to do, you need to plan it. And writing an application, whether or not it's successful, is actually worth the effort. of planning the project. If it's something you really want to do and it's important enough, and you've got the right colleagues that you can work with, doing a good plan, making the application, and then doing the research, whether or not it's successful, is really an important sort of career goal, or even a contribution goal, a professional goal for people to adhere to.
Thanks, Peter. I've got a question in the chat from Stacy. She's asking for any tips in the instance where, you know, for the early career industry fellowship, for example, which targets individuals with less than 5 years of academic or industry experience. What are your tips? Sharon, what did we see in the last round?
For the industry fellowships, it is definitely research experience that they count. It's not time since PhD. It's quite different to the other fellowships. So if you've had only say 0.2 research experience for a year and the rest of the time's been teaching, you just count up the 0.2. So we do find that early career researchers can be many more than 5 years post PhD, because it is counting up just your research experience. What else would you like to know about that particular scheme?
I guess I was just curious, when you presented the other data and it showed the linkage program has a success rate of individuals who have had at least 17, 18 years of research experience, and this is a linkage program still, but it's in the early career bracket.
Yeah.
It obviously, there's a bit of disparity. So I'm curious around that.
Yeah, the this linkage fellowship scheme is quite a new thing. Like linkage projects is project funding and relationship building. The fellowships is also relationship building, but it's also about building capacity of researchers to work across that university industry space. So they're looking for, at the early career stage, they're looking for history with working with industry, if you have it, and a really good supportive environment to help develop the ECR into somebody who will be able to work across industry and university settings.
Thank you.
I've got some presentations on that. If you'd like me to send you some extra information on that scheme, that's fine too. So
Great.
Any other questions or comments?
Maybe just, can I ask Peter, because I know you had a very complex linkage with multiple partners, multiple universities. Is there anything, any sort of messages you'd like to give people on sort of the complexities of one, doing the application for that, but then managing the project afterwards?
Well, well, firstly, you have to be confident in the partners, confident that you can work with them, confident that they understand the messiness of research and the ambiguity of data collection, particularly in educational environments. And you have to actually want to spend time on, if you like, working on the partnership aspect, working on the relationship with the partner, with the educational institution. Having said that, it also gives you a lot of clout or credibility when you actually get to the stage of publishing results, because you have actually worked with a system, coming to understand the constraints that they're operating under, the nature of the data collection, even getting access to data that you wouldn't otherwise have access to, such as system-wide NAPLAN results or something like that. So I think it's worth the effort to try and engage partners and to try and find ways of engaging with partners on doing research that they're interested in. But of course, you're the one who's got to be interested in research, because you're the one who's got to plan the research, write it up, gather the data, present the results in conferences and so on. So it has to be something that you're passionate about anyway.
Thanks, Peter. It's 1:52. Any other questions? No? Okay. I'd like to really thank Sharon, Sarah, and Peter for your time and for sharing your knowledge with us today. For everyone else, we're recording this session, so what we'll do is send you a link to the recording, and any resources that Sharon provides to us, I'll send through as well. Thanks so much, everyone.